Testing 1, 2, 3. That's better. Thank you, Phil. Can you all hear from here? Okay. Let's see. I was emailing with Richard. Let me see.
So, okay.
Can you hear me, Richard? Not yet. I wonder if he can see us. Hi, we can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Richard? Okay, we can hear him, but he can't hear us.
Okay. Oh yeah, 1 second.
Okay.
We should be able to hear us.
Can you hear us now? Can you hear me?
Richard, can you hear us?
Nope. Couldn't tell if he said yes. Can you hear me, Richard? No. Hold on. I'm going to call him.
That may be a smart way to do it. He can hear you on his phone.
Yeah, let's see. Let's see if he has it next to him.
Ask if he can hear us now.
Richard, can you hear us?
Oh, he can hear you. Okay. Okay, ignore that call. That was me.
And then this mic could be a little louder. I don't want it to feedback, but just that's what's picking up his audio.
Can he can't see us. Can he see us? Is he able to see us there? At least he can see the panel.
Yeah, I think.
Can you see the panel at all, Richard, from the screen?
No, because the camera is here. Natosha.
Okay. But I'm saying he could at least see us from there, I guess, is what I was thinking.
All right, let's see here.
Oh, because the video's off.
Let me just try this one.
I don't know if he's hearing me over here. Okay.
Let's see. Richard, can you hear us now? I can. Wonderful.
Okay.
We will seek to project and make sure that your mic is loud. As a Christian in my last church used to say, it's amazing that we're the same species that landed on the moon. I used to think that sometimes during the pandemic. It's like, you're on mute. And then we've had that conversation.
Yeah.
So this would be a good exercise in elocution. We would try to speak loudly and clearly, which is always good in church ministry. Well, we're delighted that we're having this conversation this morning, and I'm going to offer an introduction first of all I'm going to be asking some questions, and I want to have some time for you to engage in asking some questions or offering some comments, and we're probably going to use an unknown mic for that, probably going to be your mic. On the screen, on my right here is Richard Rothstein, Distinguished Fellow of the Economic Policy Institute, Senior Fellow Emeritus at the Thurgood Marshall Institute of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and author of many books on educational policy and racial equality. He is the author of the 2017 book, The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America, which recovers a forgotten history of how federal, state, and local policy explicitly segregated metropolitan areas nationwide, and more recently in 2023, just a couple of years ago, published Just Action, How to Challenge Segregation Enacted Under the Color of Law, co-authored rather delightfully with his daughter Leah Rothstein, offering practical applications for the desire we may have to combat segregation in today's society. And All Saints was honored to host them both at that time when that book was being launched. So this is a return leg, if you like. We're so delighted, Richard, that you are with us, and and we're very grateful to whoever controls Zoom right now that it is working. We're glad that you're here. I believe you can hear me. So we're going to carry on. Natasha Reid Rice is a minister for public life at All Saints. And you may be asking yourself, she's what? And Minister for Public Life, just to reiterate that and repeat that in our community, is a way of thinking about the model of the diaconate. So a deacon in the Episcopal Church is somebody whose ministry is out in the world, typically amongst places of social and economic poverty. And so, and the vocation of a deacon, in part, is to remind the church of its vocation to love the poor, as Peter invites and reminds Paul to do in his ministry amongst the Gentiles. It goes back to the beginning of Christianity, that we may be people who remember the poor. And so Natasha's role is to help us keep the life of the city, to remind All Saints, the church in this case, of the city's life. That's what it means to be a minister of public life for All Saints. And Natasha's ministry is bivocational, which is the future, in many ways, of the church, beyond her church work, as she's served, and I put has served here because that's a part of the story this morning, as the Global Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Habitat for Humanity International. Did I get this right? Now leads the Home Initiative. Remember that correctly?
Home team.
Home team. I love it. Can I be on the home team?
Yes.
Okay, good. More about that later today. It's as we shared this story with one another, it was a key motivation for us to have this conversation. She's also the founder of Fresh Rain for Life Ministries, and I believe this is still currently serves or recently did on boards the Global Harvard Alumni Association as elected director, the Atlanta Community Food Bank, the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, and Invest Atlanta's Emerging Markets Incorporated. Before joining All Saints, Natasha served as the Associate Pastor of Women's Ministries at Ebenezer Baptist Church here in Atlanta. And we're so grateful for your ministry. It's a twofer this morning with you, because you're here in the pulpit and you're here in Ellis Hall. There's a very simple framework for this conversation. My brain likes simplicity. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. So you can know, it's like a Baptist sermon, the 3 parts. You know you're near the end. Do I get away with that?
That was
about?
good.
That's good.
That was
That's
very
good.
good. I slipped 3 points in and didn't dive into all of them because I'm in an Episcopal context with only a few minutes to preach.
So I did.
You like how I slipped that in?
You did. So let me just add this. You've been working hard so that we can finish our 9 o'clock service in an hour to prioritize our fellowship time. What you don't know is that Natasha has an alarm, a buzz on her wrist. So if you see her mid-sentence, it means that the time's up. I want her one day just to be mid-sentence and say, Amen. It's all about time for it.
That's great. It almost happened today.
Well, I wanted us to have this this is part of the series called What's the Big Idea? And we're going to look at major ideas in society today. And it felt important to me for us to return to the ideas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're specifically going to focus on diversity and inclusion. As things shift rapidly, it's important, and certainly within the church, we have taken ideas seriously. We've taken our time with ideas to understand them at their root. When somebody says they're radically committed to something, what they're literally saying, they may not mean it, but what they're literally saying is that I'm committed to this at its root, what it really means. And so I wanted to invite us to return to concepts that have been very important in the life of the church and in the life of the nation. And that's what we're going to think about today. So I want to begin by looking backwards to gain a sense of the progress that has been made. This is not to say that everything is great and we've sort of reached the promised land and we got complacent. But it is to celebrate and give thanks for the fact that progress has been made over the past 60 years with regards to diversity and inclusion. Not to glorify the past, nor to step over the fact that progress was resisted and limited, but to note that with seemingly so much in the air, up in the air, and we clearly live in an age of disruption. That is not an American context alone. Of course, it's a global age of disruption. I think that'll be a chapter in future AP, US, and global history in years to come. For example, we don't know, and you may have a view of it, what might happen to the fruits of the Voting Rights Act, for example. Don't know. it's an age of disruption, so there's that uncertainty. So I think it would be helpful for us to contextualize this conversation and the conversations you might have by getting a sense of what was achieved over this period of time, what have been the hallmarks of this progress. So here's the question. I want to invite each of you to offer a sense of what you feel are the greatest achievements of the past 60 years in America that moved us closer to achieving that dream Dr. King articulated on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963. I love that invitation. Tell them about the dream, Martin. Mm-hmm. What was the dream that was fulfilled? And Natosha, maybe we can start with you.
Okay. So thank you, Simon. Thank you for inviting us both to be
and
in
just make sure you're using the mic.
Oh, sorry.
People online would hear you.
That's right. Thank you for inviting Richard and I to sit in this moment. I do have to insert the E, though, in that conversation on diversity and inclusion. The equity piece is something that I think is very important, in particular in conversations in the church. And so maybe we'll have a chance to flesh that out some. So I was sitting here like 60 years was what year again? I was going back in my head and thinking about the last 60 years. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to edit every question, but I really am stuck on this idea of the 14th Amendment. So I'm going to go a little bit further back and how 60 years ago was an attempt to start trying to live into the 14th Amendment. I think and there are many things that have been of great significance over the last 60 years and the last 100. I will just elevate the 14th Amendment and echo some of the great work that a friend of Richard's, Sherilyn Eiffel, has been very involved in, which is really elevating the concept and idea that the 14th Amendment was the reset for America. It was the amendment that introduced birthright citizenship and the amendment that really began to flesh out what equality actually means and looks like. And I love the way she says that it's almost the true founding of this country. So we often talk about or sing about in Hamilton, the classic founders, right? Hamilton, those who signed the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. But she says, when we begin to look at the country through the lens of the 14th Amendment, you have to acknowledge the other founders, Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, many others who, through great toil, pain, violence, and shedding of blood, really began to push our country to live into what it really could be and can be. And I'll conclude on this and turn it over to Richard. What's interesting is we've got the policy law in place that we need to be the country that we often say we aspire to be. The question is, do we live into it? And so, Richard.
I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding, but I think I understand what you want me to talk about. And you can hear me okay?
We can.
I think the biggest accomplishment of the last 60 years, at least up until this past January, was the empowerment and enabling of a black middle class that has been fully integrated into the leadership of this country. Not perfectly, but the black middle class that was created largely as a result of affirmative action in higher universities, and then a requirement that employers approve of ministers, lawyers, physicians that hadn't previously existed in a desegregated society. Of course, there were few of those in segregated black neighborhoods, but we're in a very, very different place. If I could take a second, in the 1960s, I was a research assistant at the Chicago Urban League, and one of my jobs was to count up all of the supervisory positions in the city of Chicago in the private sector that were held by African Americans. This was any kind of supervisory position, even going as low as a shipping and receiving director. I went through these giant directories of companies that had to list all of their supervisors supervisors and their phone numbers in case someone needed to call them. There was no internet, no email at that time. This was about 1965. I went through the 4,000 or 5,000 largest corporations in the city of Chicago. There was not a single African American in the city of Chicago, a city with 35% population in 1965, in a position in the corporate sector as high as a shipping and receiving director. Not a single African American. Now, if you had told me, or I was a young kid, I probably didn't understand to the extent that we today the significance of that. So if you had told my research director, whom I worked, that in 10 or 15 or 20 years you couldn't find a company in the city of Chicago without a somewhat diverse leadership board, he would have said you were crazy. But indeed we did it. And we did it in large part by affirmative action that was pursued by colleges and universities that required me to seek out qualified African Americans who had previously been excluded. Now you all know that that policy has now been prohibited by the Supreme Court, and the share of African Americans admitted into entering classes in the most selective universities has plummeted. So I think it's a tragic situation. And by the way, the Trump administration is taking other actions to make sure that no further gains are made from this low point that we've now reached, which require all colleges and universities to submit annually the test scores and race of all of its admitted students, with the idea that any college or university that has average test scores of African Americans no lower than the average test scores of white students must be, in fact, discriminating and will be prosecuted. So we made enormous progress up until this past January, and I think we're in a very tragic period right now to reverse that progress.
Thank you, Richard. It makes me think about one of the great gifts of living in Atlanta. But one of the sort of category areas, in a way, that I've fallen into, that I think is sort of invited to fall into in our society, is to talk about the exceptional black person. And so there's an exceptional black person who is, frankly, a super achiever in whatever their field is, and is taken as sort of evidence that there we are, we've made progress. And there are two things I want to offer. One is, we should get into the habit, if you're not already, I encourage you to do this, of celebrating Atlanta. Because it's a wonderful example from across this nation, when we look across the nation, of a city that has tried to read what John Hope Bryant calls the memo. And he wrote a book called The Memo, essentially saying that one of the key elements that needs to happen in our country is that economic power develops in black communities and for black individuals in to the generations of black families. And so I love that my children can grow up in a city where black leadership is normative, not exceptional. That is clearly not the case across the country. So I think that we should be loud and proud about Atlanta and saying that again, whoever thinks that Atlanta's a perfect community, we'll just take them out to lunch and show them, of course, we're not a perfect community, but that there's something there for us, that we're trying to make something normative. And I'll offer a vision from the church. Christianity only believes in one exceptional person. His name is Jesus Christ. The rest of us are invited to sit around Christ's table. It's the table that counts. It's having a place at the table as equals in Christ. It's not about this sense that there are exceptional cases and therefore our progress, if you like, is how we are finding our place at that table. this church community still has it as one of its core goals to make sure that when we say, whoever you are, wherever you are in your journey, you are welcome at this table, that we can live that out such that anybody, whatever their background, could feel like, you know, I could belong there. And we're not there, and we'll never get there, but we mustn't let go of that hope. And I think our city encourages us in that. And I think we should celebrate it. I wonder if we could move on to today. So, when the British don't like hyperbole, so I said we live in bewildering times. But that may not be exactly. I mean, whatever you can fill in your own blank of what you feel like it's like to live today. I suspect that's true. Whatever people put on their ballot sheet, it's bewildering today. And we've lived in bewildering times before, here and in other parts of the world. And I want to see if we get a sense of what's happening more locally in time today. We're looking back over the last 5 years, trying to trace a line from the killing of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter demonstrations to the present time. And I've got 3 questions that were sort of mini questions, but you can sort of, I'll say them and you can just sort of fold them into one answer. What did we see shift, do you think, in 2020 in terms of the themes of diversity, equity, and inclusion? So something shifted in 2020. What do you think it was? What do you think has happened since then in American life? Perhaps particularly in the areas of American life you're most interested in or closest to. So you don't have to sort of offer a massive overview. But what would you characterize as happening in the country right now in terms of both rhetoric and action? We've just heard an example there about affirmative action. So it felt like to me that something shifted in 2020. Something moved. There was movement, and then there was sort of counter-movement. Reformation, counter-reformation. And where does that get us to today? So, Richard, I don't know if that is clear. It's the same question that I sent the email to about, but if you're able to hear that, I'd love to hear your sense of 2022 today.
Well, there was in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, there were demonstrations all over the country, and they resulted in a much more expanded push to create diverse firms, institutions, to ensure that African Americans had opportunities throughout this country. There was a renewed push to enforce anti-discrimination laws. There was a renewed push to find ways of subsidizing African American home ownership. And there was progress made in all of those areas. What's happened since is a reaction. We have a situation today that, as you all know, is quite frightening and terrifying. We are no longer a democratic society. We have a dictatorship that ignores laws as well as traditions, and that's determined to roll back all of those gains that were made after 2020. After 2020, the gains that were made in the previous 55 years have been expanded enormously. So, what do we do about it? Well, we can push back against the pushback. I mentioned before, this is just one example, I mentioned before, the rollback of affirmative action, and really the prohibition of affirmative action, and the attempt, the explicit attempt to prevent successful African Americans from integrating into the society. But if a university chooses to defy the Trump administration's prohibition on diversity and affirmative action, it will be targeted by the administration. But if every university did it, or if most universities did it, it would not be possible to target them. And so what's necessary today is not isolated action of resistance, but widespread action of resistance in an area like this. And if that happens, it might be possible to prevent at least some of the rollback.
Thank you, Richard. So I do want to touch on the exceptionalism conversation just very quickly, because I think the danger of that, and I've been the exceptional Black person. I mean, I had to be the only Black student in certain schools and education and all that kind of stuff. And my exceptionalism is not based upon kind of the public view. It's kind of, you know, my dad would say it's how you were raised. But the exceptionalism issue is this. It allows society or whomever, I'm just saying that generally, to point to that one person and say we've overcome without acknowledging the systemic reality that we all sit in and live in every day. There is a systemic reality that impacts people of color, it impacts marginalized populations, it impacts women, and the quicker we get out of our disbelief of that, the quicker we can begin to find solutions that actually encompass all of God's children and their concerns. So that's a really quick summation because I have limited time. The other thing, and if Richard and I are examples of what DEI can look like. He is one of my dearest friends. We talk weekly, and we couldn't be more different in age, in hairstyle, in race, and in religion. And yet he has enriched my life in just amazingly wonderful ways. And he pushes me in my thinking and my perspective. So I just want to give that as an example of what it lives out to look like, right? But so when we talk about what happened since George Floyd, there were some good points that came out of the, first of all, God rest his soul, because we say the George Floyd moment and we're talking about a man who was murdered on the streets of Minneapolis. But what happened from that moment, there were many good things, but I'll tell you, especially walking around the world as a Black woman, and also now as a person who was considered a DEI practitioner, and I'll talk about that in our next question, I was extremely frightened by what was happening, because I knew that the way that this pendulum was swinging, it swung so far that I knew the reaction was going to be vicious. Because this notion, and then there many people began believing, oh my gosh, are we really in a post-racial America, right? That happened when Obama was elected. It happened again, that voice started kind of coming up again after the initial reaction to the murder of George Floyd. And that's always so dangerous, because when we talk about that systemic reality, it takes more than one incident to shift it, to change it. It's the air we breathe in this country. Unfortunately, it's the water we drink. It is so pervasive that if we don't find ways on a daily basis, one of my first partners in the work of racial equity was a white gentleman when I was at Harvard. And he said, if we do not find ways every day to combat the systemic reality that we live in this country, that we all inherited, right? So there's no single point finger of guilt. If we don't find ways to dismantle it, we continue to benefit from it, live in it, and perpetuate it. And so that has always rested with me in the way that I work. So since George Floyd, we saw that wide pendulum swing. And even those of us who call ourselves progressive, many of us felt very uncomfortable because we knew a reaction was coming. And what happens oftentimes when we get the wins, whether it's affirmative action, the move in DEI, I don't feel like, and the lawyer mind goes into play, that we actually develop a protection plan for the win. We get the win, we celebrate, we walk in it, and we don't spend our time curating the protection plan. And we're seeing the impact of that.
In congregations, in families, in marriages, there's just in any human relationship, there's a dynamic where our inclination is returned to where we were. That's our default. And
apparently a muscle memory too, because if I don't go to Orange Theory for a week.
I can't help it. And so from a theological perspective, it's essential to remember our hope. And one of the ways that we remember our hope, because it's the engine of change, one of the ways we remember our hope is to incline ourselves toward practical action. So I want to invite, and we saw that, just to sort of offer a parable from All Saints, we saw the power of having a singular focus in the beginning of this year when this church said, "Hallelujah, anyhow, we're going to rally around refugees in our community." Powerful witness to the gospel of hope. I want to invite Natosha to begin this last one, because this is inclining you to be practitioners of hope. Could you briefly tell the story of how you pivoted? And the phrase that I love, this sort of image I love, is that you pivoted in your workplace at Habitat for Humanity to where something could have been, was under threat, your very job title, the work you're doing, to make it possible to be bridge builders and to walk across bridges and gather there. But could you share at home?
Yeah, thank you. To say it very quickly, so, January happens, and we'll hear more from Richard on kind of the steps, and I was in a moment of disbelief. I'm thinking, wow, since these last 5 years, we've been building what we thought was hope, right? And we were building hope. But then all of a sudden, in this specific area of work, please understand, I understand we have all different political views in this room. So I'm not making a ploy for or against Trump. You've heard me say, I don't believe as Christians we're called to the partisan, but we are called to be engaged and aware of the politic, because we have to figure out how to navigate and find solutions for those who are marginalized. That one sheep that got away, that's my life's call, is to find it. And so when we think about the work of DEI and the work that I was specifically charged to do within a housing organization, it was early February morning. I woke up, and really that morning was the morning I cried, because I went from disbelief to, oh my God, could this God be happening? And it was in the moment of tears that I saw the light turn on and I saw the opportunity. I began realizing and thinking, my grandmother didn't have DEI. Martin Luther King didn't have DEI. Ida B. Wells didn't have DEI. And they kept doing the work. And I was like, I didn't like the acronym anyway when I came into the job. I've never been a fan of it. When I came into the job, I asked, if I take this job as global head of DEI, I want to change it in 6 months. But the work kept going and I didn't have the time. And the reason I didn't care for it is, one, it doesn't resonate globally. Two, it's so limiting because it doesn't really tell anyone what we do. It just becomes the default of DEI. Now DEI, as we see, it stands for pilots who fly planes that come to horrible ends. It stands for anyone who looks other than what the acceptable vision of success is. And that's not DEI or what it was intended to be, but that's what it's been thwarted and perverted into. So I was always a fan of changing it. It was also often seen as an HR function, and I'm much more interested in how we practice it in the world. And so now, and that question, I began digging deeper and saying, what is it that we do? And we at Habitat actually say we are builders of hope. That is part of our mission. Our mission is to put God's love into action by bringing people together to build homes, communities, and hope. How do we do that? In the housing sector with integrity and being very cognizant of the history of housing, which Richard so magnificently spells out in his book, The Color of Law, taking that understanding into how we build solutions to create more equity, both in community and coming together. How do we bring people together in this moment? Across different sides of the aisle, the idea of bridge building and what that looks like and what does that mean. And bridge building is essentially when you build a bridge, you have to come from both sides. How do we find ways to have conversations again? How do we find ways to figure out how we live in community together again? How do we find ways so that Richard and I run into each other in the grocery store or in the libraries, right? In our segregated housing patterns that we've inherited historically, we have to be intentional about figuring out how we do that. And Atlanta is ripe for an opportunity at that. And so the work that we're doing all over the country now is activating an existing network, just like the civil rights movement did, and working within those existing networks in 950 communities all over the country, and in Canada, and in Puerto Rico, and soon to be in Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. How do we find ways to talk, to think about what we can do together as a community to build, to bring together, and to build hope. And so our team name now is is a greater and more accurate reflection of that work, and it's Housing Opportunities and Mission Engagement. And the acronym is We're the Home Team. And so it was a pivot that required deeper thinking, a pivot that allowed for integrity to mission, and a pivot that allowed for integrity of purpose. And then now allows us to be more resonant globally, but also I think hopefully to help folks understand what it is that we do. And so that pivot and that bridge building component that I'd shared with Simon, we're doing that through courageous community cohorts all throughout the country, teaching folks how to have hard conversations, because to do housing and to build equity and to build inclusion and diverse communities, we've got to know how to speak to each other, how to connect with each other. We also are working on what we just had a bridge building summit in York, South Carolina, a very charged place, and figuring out how do we talk, how do we engage community, how do we begin to see the humanity in one another so that we actually become the humanity in habitat, not just habitat for humanity.
I love that. If you're interested in learning more about this, another metaphor has been weaving or being a weaver. And David Brooks has had for several years an enterprise really, that has attempted to tell the stories and uplift the stories of people who are weavers. He says we all know a weaver, and it's often the person who sort of very quietly stitching together their community. I also want to commend you before I move to ask a question of Richard. Our very own Gary Mason, not our own, but we'll claim him for a minute. Gary Mason, who's been a guest preacher here many times, a visiting professor at Emory, who's been doing work for the Carter Center, was part of the Northern Ireland peace process. He said it is imperative in American society, and he's been here many, many times, for us to build those bridges, to cross from the other side, wherever we are, to engage one another. He saw the transformative power of that in Northern Ireland between Catholics and Protestants, who held the memory that the person on the other side of the table murdered my family member. We have no future unless we come together, would be his, as Desmond Tutu, no future without forgiveness. Richard, your book is a wonderful, Just Action is a practically inclined text. It should get an award for that reason alone in academia. We give thanks for that. I'd be curious either if you know of examples or models of how people have taken up the suggestions in your book or the model, either you've heard about that or just any of those that you think are particularly powerful for you that could inspire us today to imitate what you have in your book.
Well, certainly I can try that. Let me begin by referring to the conversation that you just had. We have, as we, white people, black people, people of other ethnicities, have very little contact with each other outside of our workplaces, and in some cases, in our churches. People do not have social relationships with persons. They don't talk about non-work related things. They don't know each other and understand each other's experiences. In this sequel book to the Code of Law, Just Action, we begin, and I want to emphasize this because it's not the part of the book that gets the most attention, but it's the most important part of the book. We begin by saying that to take effective action, to create more opportunity for everyone in this country, we need to create those social relationships first. We can't simply do it as separate communities. And so we begin by talking about how we can try to create groups, neighborhood groups, communities that are diverse, not for the purpose